I think a step closer to some real football that happened this week for the Indianapolis Colts. I'm Kevin Bowen. We're back, another edition of Kevin's Corner. And as we record this one on Wednesday afternoon, April 12th, just got back from the Colts complex. Second time this week, local pro day on Monday, and today their first media availability of the 9-week off-season program. So, again, voluntary, attendance pretty high this time of year, which is to be expected, I think, from 4-12-1 and a new head coach. But heard from Shane Steichen, Michael Pittman, DeForest Buckner, Zaire Franklin. So we'll share some thoughts on that. Today's pod, though, I don't think we've really committed a full pod to looking at, and let's just call it a group of five. I feel like Hendon Hooker's name gets brought up enough that he deserves to be included with the other four quarterbacks. Just more from attention than I think maybe likelihood he gets taken at 4 or something like that. So we'll chat about all of them today. We'll replay a Diante Lee interview. Diante Lee, for those unfamiliar, NFL draft analyst for The Athletic. He joined our morning show earlier this week. So like we've done here the past couple of shows, we'll throw that in right before Twitter questions. Eddie Garrison, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. I would just wish the draft is already here and it's over with because, man, it's getting hard to talk about not on just the podcast, but on the airways daily for us on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan to, kind of say something different every day. But we all know the inevitable. They're going to draft a quarterback, but it's always fun thinking of the different scenarios that could possibly happen.
Yeah, and the thing about it, Eddie, is as redundant and as I am with you, let's just get the draft here. And I'm watching the WNBA and I'm like, wait, didn't the college season just end? And now they're already doing their draft? I'm
in a month their regular season starts. Yeah, so it's like you get no time off.
Part of me is like, you just still never know once you get to draft night. You don't. Is Houston really going to take a quarterback at 2, or is there some sort of, Will Anderson pass on C.J. Stroud? What would that do to Arizona at 3? How would teams react to that? How would the Colts react to that? That's what makes the NFL draft such a wild, wild show. So let's get into it, okay? I guess before we dive fully into the quarterbacks, I'll share a couple quick tidbits from what I learned up there at West 56 earlier today. Again, the Colts continue to downplay Lamar Jackson. That's not even on my radar anymore. Shane Steichen just had a direct and concise comment, which is par for the course with him. There's no wasted air with Shane Steichen. He's going to be very direct and basically said, we are focused on the draft and guys in their own building at the quarterback spot. DeForest Buckner was very adamant that there were no trade talks involving him this year. He said that whether you base that off of the Colts side of things or him in requesting a trade. I did find it interesting, he mentioned that you look at Stephon Gilmore in year 11, Buckner in year 8. For Gilmore, it might be a little bit different than it would be for a Buckner at that point in his career and just how you view things. Could Buckner at one point get to the level where he's like, hey, man, I am craving, getting back there and experiencing that. And maybe you do request some sort of trade at that point. But again, what was not there. Said he had a laugh when he woke up on the West Coast and he had a couple of, buddies from other teams be like, hey, man, is this true? We would love to have you on our team. It was a torn UCL for Stephon Gilmore, for DeForest Buckner.
Dang.
This year. So the old Tommy John ligament, said did not need surgery. If he was a thrower of some sort of ball, he would need it, but does not need it. Michael Pittman, acted like it's not a major goal of his to get a contract extension this offseason. I'll be very curious to see if that actually happens. But, this is a guy that, I think if you look at his career so far, I could make the case that he deserves one. Typical Chris Ballard, guys kind of get one after year 3 of their rookie deal. But at that position and how those contracts have looked lately, it's probably a bit complicated. And you're weighing is Pittman good, really good? Has he played with bad quarterbacks? How do you just juggle all of that? Yeah. It's complicated.
I was going to ask you, is his desire to wait more so than the Colts on a contract extension because he's not really had a franchise level quarterback other than Phillip Rivers, and even still, he was still getting acclimated to the NFL.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great point, Eddie, and I'll be really interested to see how that plays out. Lastly, on the Shaquille Leonard front, again, sounds like, certainly going to take their time with that. Zaire Franklin did mention that him and Leonard worked out a bit down in Tampa, some early mornings there, 5:30, 6 a.m.
Anything on Jonathan Taylor on the ankle?
I felt like Leonard was more the pressing injury one than Taylor. I don't envision that we get a lot of injury updates in April. I mean, basically all that Shane said was he's progressing well. There's no timetable. So mini camp at the end of this month, because you have a first-year head coach, you're allowed to do that. So we'll see, if that evolves at all. Again, I don't think you need to have Taylor on the field in the spring, but coming off the ankle surgery, that'll be something to keep an eye on. So if you want a little bit more on that front, got a notebook up on 1075thefan.com. Check that out.
Always love the notebook, and way to promote it this time. I'm wearing off on you.
I was gonna say, I feel like I've grown a little bit in that area. Thank you to you, Eddie.
Yeah, I know.
You usually are the one that does that for me.
Can't forget, we've already plugged the website. Now I got to plug the YouTube. Make sure you like, rate, subscribe, and all that good jazz. Make sure you leave a comment if necessary. The comment section has been kind of busy here last couple of podcasts, but let's transition now, Kev. We've kind of been teasing it over the last 3 to 4 weeks in terms of diving into these top 5 quarterbacks, pros and cons. We'll start alphabetically. You have this on the website at 1075thefan.com, and you start with Hendon Hooker of Tennessee.
Yeah, and again, alphabetical order here. We'll go pros and cons. On Hooker, Eddie, he arguably has the best passing and running numbers of any quarterback in this draft. And certainly any of these 5, I guess, would probably be the better way to put it. I mean, his production, again, his dual threat production. C.J. Stroud, you could point to a lot of passing numbers. But in terms of, or even Bryce Young, but in terms of dual threat production, I would say that is a huge pro. I think another pro, and 2 guys qualify for this on this list. I would argue Hooker qualifies even more than Will Levis. Eddie, it's not often you have quarterbacks that transfer up into the SEC and, have good success there, potentially great success. And Hendon Hooker definitely did that, going from Virginia Tech to Tennessee. So those are certainly the pros with him. What do you not like? In some order, and I think it's this order, I would list the system he played in, his age, and then the injury. I almost think the torn ACL, people are making a little bit too much out of it. Like, aren't we kind of at the day and age where, unless it's a running back or maybe a skill guy that's in the open field, I kind of think a torn ACL. I mean, it's not great, don't get me wrong, but it's not a death sentence by any means. I have more of a question on system than age as well. I mean, I know his age. What is he, 25, I believe? That's not, again, ideal. But basically, when you talk about this system, hash marks are different in college than they are in the NFL. So you are able to line guys up, much wider in the college game than you are in the NFL game. And that has created Tennessee's offense, which they've had great success with, to where Hooker does not have to make a lot of NFL-type reads. And it's a lot of kind of half-reading of a field. And so I don't think there's a lot of question about Hooker necessarily intellectually. But you just don't see him doing it on Sundays. Whereas, again, a guy like Levis, and not to get too much into the comparison, Levis, you can see some NFL system stuff. You can see NFL-type throws. You can see kind of NFL-type reads. And with Hooker, you just don't have enough of that on film. So those would be the pros and cons I would lay out for Hendon Hooker.
Yeah, he's certainly the most intriguing one when you think outside of Anthony Richardson, just because the stats last year.
I mean, Eddie, he's a Heisman Trophy winner if he doesn't tear the ACL.
I totally agree with you. And he has to prove it of performing in big games last year with Tennessee. I mean, look what he did against Alabama.
And, one of these guys eventually is going to come from a gimmicky college offense that can't translate to the NFL just because of the rules. And you're just going to be like, damn it, how do we not see that? Why are you overthinking that? But I just think there's a little bit too much risk for Hooker as high as, where the Colts are right now.
And I like how you threw in the efficiency in terms of running the football. I think that's an aspect that people forgot about with Hendon Hooker. They think about him in the pocket and lighting it up down the field with Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman. They forget that he was actually quite mobile and a big part of their running game.
Right. Again, I think he's best dual threat guy when you consider consistency across both of those areas.
Now, I think Colts fans feel either the strongest in terms of they want this guy or, God forbid, get this guy away from me like he's the Black Plague. He's next up on our pros and cons list. That is Will Levis.
Eddie, I'll be totally honest with you. I see more Black Plague discussion than the other way with Levis, but I would agree in that I think the most negativity revolves around Levis of any of these five, frankly. Okay, what do you like? I would say you could make the argument, Eddie, when you talk his size, like his physique, his arm, and again, the NFL background of his college experience, that's probably the best combination of anybody on this list.
Now, size, he's 6'4", 225. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, and obviously the arm, well documented, and again, with Liam Cohen and Rich Sangrello, we're talking about two different NFL assistants that have been his coordinators each of the last 2 years. And so he was in, Sunday-type offenses, probably more so than any of these five.
Even more so than Bryce Young? With
Yeah, you could probably throw Bryce. I mean, obviously the Bill O'Brien
Thank you.
experience there. That would probably be the other one that you could throw up there. By all accounts, this is a guy that checks the toughness box. And I know that's a hard trait to necessarily talk a lot about because it's an intangible. You don't get tested for it at the NFL Combine. Again, I think you have to acknowledge there is an adversity in transferring and doing that to the level of the SEC. Now, I think Penn State and Virginia Tech are two different situations where, Hooker came from. I would say Hooker had more of a trade up in competition. Levis, didn't really have that necessarily. Obviously, you got beaten out by Sean Clifford in Happy Valley. Kentucky people rave about him as a teammate and as a behind-the-scenes type of guy, and played through some injuries this past season. And I think all of those are areas you need to mention. I think it's worth pointing out, Eddie, I don't think we have massive character questions about any of these five.
I want to say I think the one guy that you would is probably Will. I think that's the only guy that you could possibly question mark because of the rumblings that are coming out of him bombing these interviews and some of the way and how he comes across sometimes. I think he's the only guy, though, that we've heard anything negative in that regard about.
Yeah, and again, just the validity of some of that, I'm not 100% sold on. I still think, well before he became a major draft prospect, people Kentucky, his teammates at Kentucky, have been very public in their admiration for him. That's difficult for a transfer to achieve, in my opinion. Now, what do you not like? The turnover numbers and the sack numbers are pretty alarming. And the avoidance of those areas you don't like. Again, how much of that is injury related? How much of that is changing systems and coordinators? You certainly want to factor that in. I think at some point you want to see a quarterback be able to kind of raise a sinking ship. And I don't know if we saw enough of that this past season from him. That ship, it had a lot of leaky parts around it, and I don't think he did enough necessarily. And so the debate's going to come down to, do you believe junior year Matthew Stafford talk, or is the senior year just more of a reflection of who he is?
Or is he in the middle?
Sure. That's we probably don't focus on the middle enough. We probably want to go Josh Allen or Carson Wentz.
Or Tannehill.
So that's where things are at, I think, with Levis. Again, to me, the biggest pro is you combine the size, combine the arm, combine the NFL system. Arguably the best one on this list. The question mark, the avoidance of bad plays, was something he did not do a good job of.
The one thing that I like to look at when I'm evaluating or looking at quarterbacks when it comes draft time too is poise and the ability to sense pressure in the pocket. And both of those things are major red flags to me when it comes with Levis. And that is like something that concerns me a lot.
Is that teachable?
That's a good question.
I have skepticism if that is teachable. And that would be concerning to me. The guy that we'll name last on this list, there's no issue with poise whatsoever. And to me, that trait that poise accuracy trait, boy, that's the gold. That's gold to me.
To me, it's just coaching an internal clock into the quarterback in terms of this instance being Will Levis. All right, well,
was that injury related? Was that offensive line related?
So many questions.
With Levis, I'll never forget Frank Reich's answer, and we can move on to Anthony Richardson next, but I'll never forget Frank Reich's answer at the Combine about Levis. It was almost like the first words out of Reich's mouth were all those excuses is the only word that's popping in my head. But basically, when you talk about Levis, you immediately go to the senior year and you talk about the poor O-line.
Yeah.
And the change in OC and the lack of weapons around him. And it's like, are those real or are those excuses? Mm-hmm. And how valid are they?
It's recency bias.
That's a difficulty with Levis.
Yeah, it's just recency bias. We're all suspect to it. But the next guy, you already said, Anthony Richardson, he's literally built in a lab. 6'4", 244, runs a sub 4.5, has a cannon of an arm. When you look at traits, he's got it all.
You said it right there. You explained perfectly why those are the biggest pros with him. He's a video game created type player in many ways. When I first saw him at the Combine, I thought the DNs aren't talking until Saturday or Sunday, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I thought the tight ends were yesterday. Like, I'm like, what? I'm like, is he playing for the Pacers tonight? Pacers need some front court.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was left in a bit of awe, frankly, when I first saw him, and more so than anybody else on this list. Again, all of them bring it to a degree, but he brings the leg element to another level. Now, you can probably look at that one of two ways. One, obviously it's a major pro, and it's such a weapon to have at that position. Two, does that bring more injury risk? Now, granted, his size is different than a Lamar Jackson, than a Michael Vick. He's just built as a different runner than those guys. I could probably go pro or con a little bit, Eddie, on the 13 starts. Mm-hmm. I would say most people would go con, but the pro would be there's a whole lot to groom. There's a whole lot to mold, and maybe the bad habits aren't as abundant or the scar tissue isn't as immense as it might be for some other QBs that have just played more. I tend to think I'd rather see him have gone back to school because then you're going to fight this internal battle. I mean, I thought it was about Shane Steichen today. Can you imagine if they draft Anthony Richardson? Every single week, Shane Steichen's going to get when are you playing Richardson question.
You got any packages for him?
Seriously. Or start him, obviously, full-time.
Yeah.
That's literally going to be it every single week with him. So, again, I probably am a little bit in the con category on the lack of playing experience, but I can listen to some people that are like, hey, that just means those traits are not as, firm in the cement. We got a little bit more to work with. What do you not like? The 54% number is extremely low compared to others on the list. Diante Lee, I want to say I asked him the question of how much of that is around the line of scrimmage, how much of that is more down the field. That's always a question you get with the college QBs. It feels like Richardson was a little bit more down the field. But that accuracy element to me is easily the biggest thing. And, this probably gets back to what I was mentioning a few minutes ago, Eddie, about the con aspect to the lack of starts. Yeah, I thought I read somewhere that 13 starts or less, I believe just Mitchell Trubisky and Mark Sanchez have gone in round one. I think when you talk about guys that maybe have had limited playing experience, Cam Newton certainly comes to mind.
Trey Lance had more than 13 starts?
Yeah, I think he had 2 years. Well, North Dakota State goes on those playoff runs, so I feel like they just play more games than just the 13 number. Obviously, they had the COVID year and we didn't play. But, when I hear names like Lamar Jackson, names like Cam Newton thrown out with Anthony Richardson, I'm thinking those dudes were generational in their small-ish sample size in college. Cam won a national title. Cam was a Heisman Trophy winner. Lamar Jackson was a Heisman Trophy winner. So that's where you look at him and say, this guy won 6 games in college. How do you evaluate how he handles winning? How do you evaluate how he handles losing? Where is the adversity playing-wise and how to respond to that as a one-year starter? Those are the unknowns, and those are the questions that you would have with Richardson. And I always go back to this quote from Ballard. He says this often about quarterbacks. At some point, you've got to deliver from the pocket. And I think that's his way of saying, like, you can create the player on Madden, and he said this well before Anthony Richardson. You can create that player, but at some point the leg element goes away, or the leg element deteriorates or slows down. Well, when that happens, can you deliver from the pocket? That would be my question here.
I'm just doing some quick math here. 167.
167, where are you at there?
Hold on here.
Is it a rating?
No. I was just looking at the worst game of the year, which was the final game for Anthony Richardson, where he was 9 for 27, I think 0 for 16 the second half against Florida State. I was just taking that game out and see what it did in terms of the completion percentage, and I mean it takes it from 54 to 56. So I mean, still not ideal, but
right. Yeah. And again, I know that there are some people out there that point to again a lot more down the field attempts, those sorts of things. It still is a very ugly looking number. Had some drops, certainly. One thing I think you like about Richardson though is several Florida's bigger games this year. He did rise to the occasion. Mm-hmm. So in the smaller sample size, he had some nice moments against some of their better opponents.
Yeah, he looked good against Utah. Had a so-so game against Kentucky, and then you look at Georgia. He had a pretty solid game, 271.
Yeah, and I'd throw LSU a little bit in there, certainly on the ground against LSU. But
yeah, 9 for 109, yeah.
That'd be another one.
Yeah. Quarterback number 4, the guy that I have loved from day one that I said I would cut my pinky off for, and then some, C.J. Stroud. He's 6'3", 214 out of the Ohio State University.
Certainly the one I think in our market, Eddie, we've probably seen the most of. I'll never forget watching the Northwestern game last year and thinking, Kevin, you are a genius for betting the under on this game, Northwestern and Ohio State in just horrific weather. But then watching Stroud run in that game and literally look like picture Josh Allen. I mean, remember when Buffalo just gets in those in those modes where they're just like, hey, we're going to pitch it to him, and this is Roncalli football. We're just running it downhill with our quarterback all day. Stroud had a few of those plays, and I'm like, oh, man, he can kind of do this. And then obviously the Georgia game, he takes it to a whole nother level. I will say the biggest pro to him is that it's the juicy phrase he used at the Combine when he called himself a ball placement specialist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he is a confident dude, and when he said that, I smirked, and then I'm like, he's right. I mean, his accuracy has got to be at the top, if not the top, of anybody in this class, particularly when you talk about these 5. And then what he did against Georgia, I mean, he showed you more on the biggest stage against the best opponent he played in college football. I mean, how can you ignore that? I mean, that was just incredible what he did.
It was surgical
in that game. Because I watched him against Notre Dame. I'm thinking to myself, man, yeah. You watch him at times in the Big Ten, and you're like, God, you want to see a little bit more out of him. Obviously, the Michigan games weren't, great moments for him. And then Georgia, that to me is a bit of a weighted test. And again, I think you like how he carries himself. He's probably a guy that's been in the spotlight right up there with Bryce Young the most. So I don't think you get a whole lot of deer in headlights from him. But that's what you like. What you don't like about him, and Eddie, this is going to be a little nitpicky, which is a compliment to C.J. Stroud. It's probably why I would label him as having the highest floor of any of these quarterbacks in this draft class. But I think it's a conversation that when you break down C.J. Stroud, you have to ask yourself, was it too easy for him? And why was it too easy for him? Did he make it too easy? Because, again, that's a credit to him. Or did just Ohio State's superior talent week in and week out make it easy for him? Now, again, the Georgia game, that's much more of an even playing field. But when you watch the NFL draft in 2 weeks, you will hear so many more Ohio State offensive players taken before you hear Alabama offensive players. And he was blessed with a great group around him in a division and in a Big Ten that outside of a Michigan and maybe a Penn State, you're a 3-touchdown favorite plus week in and week out. So I think those are the things you have to ask yourself. Again, didn't face a lot of on-field adversity, but every time I walk away from the Stroud cons or questions, Eddie, I'm like, oh my God, like that's like a teacher writing a progress report for the valedictorian in class. Are we kind of nitpicking a little bit here? But those would be a couple of questions that I would have.
And you brought up the Notre Dame game and the Michigan game and not looking his greatest, but like when you think about it, he didn't need to be great against Notre Dame. He just needed to make enough plays for them to win that game by not turning the football over and just making sure they could eat clock and keep the chains moving, and that's what he did.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and thanks for rubbing that in, and that he didn't need to be great because Notre Dame's offense couldn't do anything. But yes, you are correct on that, and I'm very glad when Ohio State returns to South Bend this year, it will not be C.J. Stroud, although they'll have a pretty good wideout.
Pretty good, too. Mecca Ibuka and Marvin Harrison Jr.
I'm sure I will feel that in late September.
Well, you never know. You got yourselves a quarterback now.
Yeah, we do. Sam Hartman, baby. Yeah. And we got some corners. Benjamin Morrison, a great freshman season. Come on now. Let's go. Upset time.
There we go. We can hype it up a little bit. All right. Final prospect that Kevin is head over heels for, and I'm sure he's in the same boat as me, cutting off more than a pinky, and that'd be for Bryce Young. 5'10", 204. It's the weight that's the biggest question mark. He's from Alabama, but let's start with the positives.
Poise. Dane Brugler, Eddie, the quote is so good. The quarterback needs to be more of a creator than a passer. To me, he's the best creator of anybody in this class. I think he's got a point guard feel to him, and I'm sure you can make the size comments there. But you know what? I mean, he played on massive stages and frequently delivered in big moments. Again, I don't want to act like Alabama had Clay Junior High skill around him, but they didn't have normal around them. So, again, I think those are things that you like about him. But, I mentioned this back early on. I mean, hell, probably during the season. In some way, shape, or form, I think what you're looking for at quarterback is poise / accuracy, athleticism. And that's probably, if you want to boil it down to kind of 2 or 3 things, that's what you're looking for. And I think he's got that. Obviously, the con is, for me, it's weight more than height.
Agreed. Same here.
It's just the durability. And, I think a point that's worth mentioning is it's not just necessarily 10 to 12 years of health. That's obviously a big part of it. But what has been a concern I've had about Lamar Jackson? It's when do injuries impact playing style?
Mm-hmm.
When does that limit you? Okay, hey, Lamar's going to play this week. But you know what? We've got to take out 70% of our run stuff for him because he's banged up. With Bryce's case, when you watch him, Eddie, the poise and always having the eyes down the field, Mahomes-like, is so special. I mean, we all saw
Aaron
the Texas
Rodgers
game.
Does the same thing.
Rodgers does the same thing. I mean, watch that Texas game. Watch the game-winning pass to Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, it is special play that he makes in that game. If all of a sudden he's unable to, based off his size, get away from as many sacks as he got away from in college, now does his outside the box, non-X and O ability to play make, does that, take him from a 98 in that category to a 90 or whatever, and how does that, impact his evaluation? So, anything else on Bryce before we move on to Diante Lee?
No, I don't think so. I think you hit the nail with the hammer there pretty good.
So Diante Lee, NFL draft analyst for The Athletic. This interview we did with him earlier this week. Before we get to Twitter questions, here is Diante Lee. We think we start our mornings relatively early. Our next guest, Diante Lee, draft analyst for The Athletic. This is the second time we've had him on, and I am amazed that he continues to do this in a live setting because where he is right now, I believe it is 6:42 in the morning. Diante, I wish I had as much individual drive as you do on a Monday. Thank you for the time today.
Oh, man, no problem at all. I would say it definitely helps being a father to a young kid. My sleep schedule is as fickle as it can be to begin with, so it's no problem. I'm usually up around this time trying to get prepped for the day, so I'm glad to be on with you guys talking ball.
Well, it means a lot that you've decided to do it with us. This time of year, I almost think the draft takes become a bit nauseating, to be totally honest with you. So I know you're not maybe a huge social media guy, but of all kind of the draft groupthink thoughts that you've seen maybe gain traction here as of late, what's the one draft stereotype, if you will, that you're like, where is that coming from?
It's hard. This class is really fascinating for that because I do think that because there's been such a clear understanding, I think, on who the best guys are in this class. Like you said, the draft takes this year can kind of get stale. I think they definitely got stale a bit faster than you would see in other classes. I would say the one that bothers me the most is that I'm consistently seeing and hearing from people who have been in the media for longer than me that I'll speak to on the side, that they have a legitimate expectation that Will Anderson is going to fall. And I just don't know what that's founded in at any point in Will Anderson's college career, based on how he performed, in the athletic testing, what we hear about him and his work ethic. So that is the one thing I have a really hard time wrapping my head around, is that there seems to be this almost kind of complete expectation that on draft day, Will Anderson is going to slip past what we might assume his draft value to be.
Diante, I'm going to ask you the question that I've asked several people, and I'm curious the various answers, actually. There are 4 quarterbacks. Obviously in Indianapolis, we're looking at quarterback heavily, right? I mean, there are 4 quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, that are all thought to be possibly the first 4 picks or 4 of the top 5 or 6 picks. Do you believe that is because this is a year where there are 4 quarterbacks who are so good that they are worthy of being top 10 picks? Or is it because there are 4 teams drafting in the top 10 that are in desperate need of quarterback?
I think that the value gets inflated by the latter. I think that it's the need for quarterback at the top of the draft that I think motivates what we see in terms of the inflation or the expectation that these guys are all going to go top 4 or top 5 or whatever the case may be. So I would say it has a lot more to do with the teams than I think the players. That's not to say that I don't believe that any of the players could be top 15, top 10 picks in their own right, but when you're looking at a draft board that happens to have a bunch of teams in the top 10, and we already saw a trade to number 1 overall for a team that we know needs a quarterback, that I think speaks to the way that teams move with their particular franchise needs more than it is how we're evaluating the players.
And Diante Lee is with us, NFL draft analyst for The Athletic. He's here on the Payless Liquors hotline. You mentioned Will Anderson earlier, and let's just write out this hypothetical a little bit. Let's say a team trades up to Arizona and takes a quarterback. Let's say it's Anthony Richardson, and the Colts are sitting there at 4, and it's Will Levis and Will Anderson both on the board. If you're Chris Ballard, you go Anderson or you go Levis?
It's rough. It's rough for me because now we're having a conversation about how you want to build your franchise, right? And I think that kind of layered in that is, what is the best way to get your franchise back to contention? Is it to get the quarterback that you believe can be a star and then build everything around him, or try to have the best roster possible to drop a quarterback into? So I think for Indy and where their roster is at, or for where I think that their franchise is looking at, I would probably go Levis, because it's been such a headache on the carousel for veteran quarterbacks and striking out with those guys because of age or because of quality of play or a combination of both. I know if I were Chris Ballard, I would have the exact same mentality that he's had this offseason, which is that I just want to have a young guy here that's cost controlled for 4 to 5 years, if not longer. We'll try to develop this thing around him, and we've got a young OC to develop with him as well, or a young head coach that was an offensive coordinator to develop with him as well. That would be the way I'd be looking at it.
Okay, and then if we want to, I guess, go to, all right, what if Levis and Richardson are both on the board? I don't know if you think this way, but it seems like, maybe there's a tier of Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud, and then the next tier is Levis and Richardson. The question I was throwing out late last week was, I think you got to find out what flaws the guys have, and then ask yourself, are those flaws teachable?
Right.
Would you say Levis's flaws are more teachable, or would you say Richardson's flaws are more teachable?
I would say Richardson, because I think that what you're trying to fix, quote unquote, with Richardson is really just a matter of slowing his process down with moving in the pocket and preparing himself to throw the ball. I think that with Levis, when you look at how he manages the pocket and the amount of contact that he's taken over the last couple of years, particularly last year when he was already hurt, and you could tell that the offense was asking him not to run as much to escape from pressure. The fact that he had a tough time finding answers for himself within that offense is really concerning for me. I don't think those same concerns exist when you're talking about, 6'4", 230, Anthony Richardson. And that's not to say that Will Levis is small or weak, but I think that you see the ways in which they handle pressure, they handle the bodies that are next to them, how they work their way around the pocket. I would be much more comfortable trying to, quote-unquote, fix the issues that you see in Richardson than hoping that you get 2021 Will Levis for the entirety of his pro career.
You have two GMs that are looking at this draft, Diante Lee, and each of them has a very specific need of player position. The one that's going to be the happiest because this draft is absolutely loaded at his position of need is the guy that is looking for what position, and the guy that is the most screwed because this one just doesn't offer a lot for him is the guy looking for what position.
Ooh, I would say there's a two-way tie for the most loaded position in this class. I would say it's tight end and corner. So if you're in need of a tight end that can work those intermediate areas, that can threaten defenses up the seam, that you can kind of build into being, a good inline blocker and maybe a guy you can flex out or get in one-on-one coverage the way that we've seen the Chiefs do with Travis Kelce. I think that this is a good class for that. And I think that there's a high potential that we end up with 3 to 4 franchise number one level corners out of this class too. I think that if you're looking for interior offensive linemen that can maybe develop in the perennial all-pros or Pro Bowl talents, I think that this is going to be a difficult draft for that. And this is maybe the lightest linebacker class I've ever evaluated, in my time working in the media. So I would say interior offensive line and linebacker, if you're looking for those guys to fix the issues that you have with their franchise, this is not the year to solve it in the draft.
Well, some good and bad there for the Colts. The Colts certainly have a need at corner, massive need at corner. That second-round pick, in my opinion, could come in here and start from day one. Diante, I want to go back to Anthony Richardson for a second. And again, Diante Lee is with us here on the Payless Liquors hotline, covers the NFL draft for The Athletic. You see Anthony Richardson's accuracy number from last year. The completion percentage is ugly, but we probably should, and I raise my hand, I probably should put some context around that number. It's like a 54% completion percentage. But when you dive into like drops, catchable balls, there's a lot of people out there that say it's a little bit better for Anthony Richardson than it looks on paper with that completion percentage. What have you observed from Anthony Richardson when it comes to the accuracy?
I think the first things you have to ask when you're looking at completion percentage is what kind of throws he's being asked to make when he's starting, in his starts. I think that really if you have questions of him, it's going to be, is what we saw in a limited amount of film really where he stands right now, or is this something that was progressing? We just didn't get enough time to see it through the way that you see a guy who's a C.J. Stroud or a Bryce Young who gets 2-3 years as a starter to really kind of iron out the kinks in their game. I think with Richardson, they were trying to throw the ball deep, or he was looking to throw the ball deep. They were a much more vertical offense, and you see some of these like RPO-heavy offenses over the last half decade to decade in the college football game. So that's a starter. You're already talking about higher variance on completions, which has an effect on it. Number two, I would say in terms of skill position talent, if we're comparing Ohio State, which maybe has had like 6 or 7 first-rounders on the roster at a given time playing wide receiver and tight end over the last couple of years and offensive line, and you look at Alabama, we know the machine that they've been with the receivers that they put in the NFL, and what we usually expect of their offensive line over the years, this past year notwithstanding. And then you look at what Florida's dealing with. I mean, even if you had given Anthony Richardson, I think, the supporting cast that Will Levis had in 2021, with Wan'Dale Robinson, with having Liam Cohen and a better, veteran offensive line. I think that his offensive line at Florida was fine. I just think that the supporting cast is something that has to be contextualized in his evaluation. And with the Colts, I think that that's particularly interesting given Shane Steichen's time with Jalen Hurts, because it really wasn't all that different when you're looking at Jalen Hurts as a quarterback, coming from Alabama and Oklahoma. He was most comfortable throwing the ball vertically, wasn't the greatest in the intermediate areas or working in the middle of the field, had decent pocket feel, but maybe left it a little bit early. But you figure that if you use his legs properly, you can buy him some time to develop, and that's what we saw in 2022. So if you're Indy and you got Shane Steichen there, the question Ballard should be asking is, do you see Jalen Hurts in Anthony Richardson? And if so, is that something that you're comfortable doing again?
Does Will Levis have mobility? I mean, I know that his consistency probably is another one that's been brought into play, but what is he like outside the pocket?
When he was healthy in 2021, he's as good an athlete, in terms of like linear speed and acceleration as there is in this class. The guy can run. I think that dealing with the toe and the foot injuries that he had for last year at Kentucky, like I said, that offense was asking him to stand in the pocket and not run as much. There wasn't as much bootlegging and getting him outside, making these off-platform throws or getting him away from pressure as there was the year before. But he can run, so if he's 100% good to go, well, I think everybody kind of saw the pictures that he put up on Instagram or what have you about how he's been working out to get himself back in shape. I don't know if I have takes on how jacked the quarterback is or isn't supposed to be successful as a pro, but if he's in great shape and you can trust that and, you're in an offense like Indy's where you're going to allow this guy to take off, with Shane Steichen when it's necessary or design runs, if he can handle it. I think that Levis, the healthiest and best version of Levis can run just as well as anybody in this class. I would say outside of Anthony Richardson, just given what we know of his top-end speed.
Diante, you said you have a boy or a girl?
I have a boy.
Okay. If I were to tell you your boy is going to sleep through the night for the rest of his childhood, but in order for that to be the case, you have to bet on one player in this draft being a Hall of Famer on offense and one player in this draft being a Hall of Famer on defense. Your answers to the offense and your answer to the defense.
Defense is easy. That's Will Anderson. I'll bet my peaceful nights on Will Anderson 100% of the time. Offense, that's interesting because there's not like a superior talent at wide receiver where it's like, hey, this guy can step in like a Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave and be a 1,000-yard guy from right out the gate and rack up maybe enough Pro Bowls and All-Pros to where they can be in the conversation throughout their career.
It doesn't sound like we have that on the O-line either, really.
Not really. I mean, you think about, the trajectory for a guy like Paris Johnson, and it's like, okay, I've seen guys that are 6'6" with nearly 7-foot arms and are huge and athletic. I've seen that turn into all-pro guys, but they usually walk into the NFL a little bit more refined from a footwork perspective, to turn into that guy. Peter Skoronski is really, really clean in terms of his feet and everything, but he is not the physical marvel that some of the other tackles and offensive linemen we expect to become Hall of Fame talents usually are, and that is a legitimate holdup for me, regardless of how good he was at Northwestern. So if I had to bank it on one guy, God, that is rough. I would have to say maybe I'd bank it on Bijan Robinson. I think, if we're talking about just skills and athleticism, he is still, I think, the best non-quarterback offensive player in this class, regardless of how we feel about running back value. But he's somebody who can legitimately pass protect. Maybe not to the level of Ezekiel Elliott in his athletic prime, but not far off. So he's somebody that you don't have to take off the field on third down. We know what he can do in terms of being an electric athlete, in one-on-one tackle scenarios and making guys miss. So I'm very comfortable with that. He can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. And I think the beautiful thing for that, if you're talking about a running back or skill position player making the Hall of Fame, it's so situation dependent. And are you going to be getting the best out of them? And because it's looking like he might be late teens to early 20s, he might land in a place that's like a Dallas. He might land in Buffalo. He could land in Cincinnati. He can land in Detroit, which has this monstrous offensive line and an offense that's really built to feature a guy like Bijan Robinson is something that they've been looking for, in the combination of DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams last year anyways. So I think there's a lot of opportunity actually this year for all of the hemming and hawing that's been done on running back value, where he might land in that late first round. And it's actually at a team where we look back and was like, I think that maybe we should have taken him in the top 12 and for no other reason than we just made an offense unfairly loaded, because of what they added at running back. So if I had to bank it on one guy, I'd rather put it on Bijan than anyone else.
Diante, great stuff, man. We got to run, get some rest, and appreciate the insight.
Yes. Man, I appreciate you guys. Back to sleep I go.
All right, Eddie, that was Diante Lee. Man lives in San Diego and joined us live at 6:45 local time.
Isn't that wild? That's commitment right there.
It's the second time we've had him on, and I feel like more than an ounce of guilt that we ask him, but I think he's so good.
How much dirt do you have on him in order to make that to happen?
I know.
Or Jake. I don't know which one of you has the dirt on him.
You'd think I'd have some empathy, too, when he's saying, yeah, my son, wakes me up at this hour. I'm like, well, you and I can cheers 3 time zones away to that. But hope you guys enjoyed that. I think we're going to have Dane Brugler on next week, so we will continue this trend that we've had. Eddie, if you're ready, let's get into Twitter questions.
Erwin is up first. Hi, Kevin. Hello from Melbourne, Australia.
Look at that. Did I sense was that a little Australian accent from Eddie Garrison?
I see.
Do you think Erwin is the real name, too?
That would be fantastic if it is.
It's got to be.
But Olivia, my girlfriend, she loves Australians.
Okay.
And she wants to go there someday. And it always, whenever she says it, it always I say it every time she ever says. She pronounces it the right way. I pronounce it the American way of Australia. Anyway, Erwin says he's a big fan of the pod, that he hasn't missed an episode since 2019.
Erwin, man, if I ever make it down under, you and me, going to get a bloomin' onion.
There we go. With Marvin Harrison Jr. being eligible for next year's draft, it would be nice for the NFL to adopt the American or Aussie rules football father-son rule. This allows a team to have the choice to draft the son of a player who has played 100 games for your club. 100 games is the equivalent of about 5 seasons. The Colts would be guaranteed to get Marvin Harrison Jr. How good would that be? One can only dream. Keep up the great work, and I love this. Love it. Can we adopt it like tomorrow?
What a great rule. I mean, hell, I know Edgerrin's got a son named Jizzle playing in basketball. I think he's going to Cincinnati or somewhere. But yeah, this sounds like a hell of a rule, right? When do you think the NFL will play in Australia? Do you think in the next decade we got a game?
I was going to say
Melbourne?
Next 3 years, guaranteed. With the way they're moving, I would say
Germany
sooner
this
than
year,
later.
right?
Yeah.
Couple in Germany.
Well, they played in Germany last year. Oh, well, yeah.
What a wild rule. Just a wild rule. Yeah, I mean, Harrison Jr., it's just going to be very interesting to see where he falls next year and how the order looks.
Mm-hmm.
Would Chicago have traded out of one if Marvin Harrison had been in this year's draft? Maybe not. It's going to be really, really interesting. But special talent, and you watch him, and the first thing that always stands out to me is just his size. His dad was not like that. His dad was just so slender, and his body control was amazing. And but yeah, big reason why I've said, worry that, and maybe I'm thinking way too much into this, Eddie. But let's say you draft Anthony Richardson.
Yep.
You start Gardner Minshew for the whole year. I think the Colts would win too many games to draft in the top 5.
I would agree.
So now all of a sudden you've taken yourself out of Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Drake May. It's like, obviously there's going to be other prospects that emerge, but I don't know. Just something that I've thought about.
Yeah, it's a nice food for thought there. And by the way, I tried to avoid the Australian accent because I didn't want to make myself look like Jake Query trying to do the British accent.
Yeah, I just have too much Indiana twang to any accent that I throw out there, so I decided to just kind of bite my lower lip and move on.
Nice. Smart idea. Matt's question is up next, and he says that we know Chris Ballard is worried about attaching his reputation to a young quarterback for the sake of his job security. However, what are your thoughts on his future with the Colts if he passes on a young quarterback and they flash on another team? I'd assume the only way Ballard can talk Jim Irsay out of taking a rookie quarterback this year would be by saying he does not believe they can play at the NFL level. But what if, for example, Anthony Richardson shows signs of being special on the Raiders after the Colts pass? What do you think his clock would look like?
Yeah, I think pretty simply, Ballard gets fired or keeps his job, and whatever happens with his quarterback. Yeah, I don't think you're in a position where you get multiple cracks at. I don't know if Anthony Richardson bombed in year 1 and you're back there drafting Caleb Williams. I just can't see that happening. I mean, I think you got to go back to the owners' meetings comments we talked about a few weeks ago, Eddie. I mean, Jim Irsay's public comments about Chris Ballard have gone from what is the size of his gold jacket to much more realistic, much more honest. You can't have the embarrassment level of that season. And I've said this before, it's not just the tangible results. I mean, those are not pretty. But outside of that, the trajectory right now is going down. Mm-hmm. It's not going up. You know, I'm asking DeForest Buckner questions today like, hey, man, Stephon Gilmore got traded. You're probably going to draft a rookie QB. Like, I know you hate the word rebuild, but on paper, there's a lot of stuff that would say that you're rebuilding. Like, that's not ideal for a GM going into year 7 there. But again, simply, I think whatever happens with this quarterback, I guess it would add salt to the wounds if, another team that you passed on a QB flourished somewhere else. But to me, it's whatever QB decision you make. If it works, you keep your job. If it doesn't, you're unemployed.
Yeah. And I think the leash for Ballard is 2 to 3 years right now.
Yeah. I don't want to act like he's on the hot seat for 2023 because you obviously want him and Shane to try and build something a little bit here for multiple years. But, after 2 or 3 years, you can have a very clear picture on what your quarterback looks like.
Jason's curious to know how much premium we put on place on the quarterback at the top of the draft. What is the lowest level of current NFL starters you would take at number 4? Dak, Carr, Cousins, Tua, etc.?
Boy, that's a really good way to look at it. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever looked at it like that. Have you?
No.
Yeah, that's a pretty unique way. I would say Dak for sure. I would take Dak. And I think there's going to be a level of you, if that quarterback can be that, but also can I trust in Shane Steichen's development to maybe tap into a little bit more than that, or certainly create an offense around him to where maybe you are getting to a different level. And this gets back to the whole, what should the thought process be at quarterback? Should you look at the AFC right now and say, this is unlike anything I've seen it, so you take Richardson because that's the biggest swing? Mm-hmm. Or should it be, again, just trying to get to a little bit of a higher floor to try and win the AFC South and, baby steps your way back into relevance around the NFL? It's a really, really good way to look at it. I think something that's worth mentioning, and we fall into this trap a little bit too much, Eddie. And honestly, I hear this from Jake, my co-host, a lot of, there's not a Burrow, there's not a Trevor Lawrence, there's not an Andrew Luck in this draft. By all accounts, that's accurate. You look at the AFC playoffs last year. I mean, honestly, look at the NFC especially. I bet if you looked at the division winners from last year, the only ones that had a quarterback-led team drafted in the top 5 was probably Jacksonville and Cincinnati. And Josh Allen obviously not, Mahomes not, Jalen Hurts not, Kirk Cousins not. Even if you take Brock Purdy out, Garoppolo probably played more snaps than Purdy in the regular season. Garoppolo, no.
Geno, no.
Geno, no. So I guess it's worth mentioning that, not every draft class has the transcendent can't-miss guy that everyone talks about in January, February, March, and April. But that doesn't mean that there's not that guy at some point in this draft to where you can get there eventually down the road. So just because there's not that crystal clear guy at number 1, and watch Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence in college. Duh. Just because we haven't seen that, or we didn't see that out of Mahomes, we didn't see that out of Josh Allen, we didn't see that out of even a Justin Herbert, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden that guy can't be really darn good for you.
Did you say top 5?
Top 5, yeah.
Throw in Tua there. He's a top 5.
Yeah, I guess division winners.
Oh, you did say that.
Who's the team I'm missing in the NFC that won a division?
You had Philly, you had Minnesota, Tampa Bay.
Tampa. Gosh.
That's easy to forget.
Yeah, that is easy to forget. Yeah, they really should have thought about relegating the NFC and AFC South for a year.
No kidding. Well, the AFC South besides Jacksonville's, I thought they deserved it.
Yeah, they got hot late.
Travis' question is up next. How is the Lamar acquisition any different than a potential Shaquille Leonard trade? They each have more value to their present organization than to any other team, especially with their injuries. We would have to want Lamar more than his own team, as we have to pay him more than the Ravens and then give up picks. And yet Ravens built roster playbook around him. If they're letting him walk, then that should give us pause. They know something we don't, or think his play is unsustainable.
It's interesting, Travis. Again, I don't think the injury situations are apples to apples. It's lower body for Jackson, but it's nothing to the degree of the complexity that I think Leonard's gone through. I mean, It's been a very difficult injury to diagnose and obviously correct. He's had multiple back surgeries in a very short span. Sustaining that shelf life, that's kind of the biggest phrase I come back to with Lamar, and I guess Jackson would be in the same case. I just think, I don't know if Travis is asking this exactly, so Eddie, feel free to interject if you feel like I'm kind of misreading it. I just think it's easier for someone to absorb a Jackson trade, not contractually, but medically, than it would be the Leonard situation.
100% agree with you there.
Baltimore wants him back, but there also is like a little bit of like, what do they know? They obviously know something that they haven't given him what you think is a decently deserved contract. It's the same coach in place. It's pretty much the same regime in place.
Yeah.
It's not like they've turned that over.
New OC, and that's about it.
Yeah, and from a regime standpoint, going more towards GM and that aspect to it. Eric DeCosta obviously had a big role and has had a big role for years in that organization. So I don't know. I think the Carson Wentz scar tissue is alive for me. And by that I mean the Eagles knew. The Eagles told the rest of the NFL what we continue to find out about Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
The Eagles knew. They knew it when they drafted Hurts, and they sure as hell knew it when they traded Carson Wentz to the Colts.
Well, I think drafting Hurts is what broke him more than anything else.
Yeah, that's fair.
And the fact that I think it was what is Howie Long's son named?
Chris Long?
Chris, yes. Chris Long said on I think it was
I was thinking Howie Roseman at first. I'm like, wait a minute, that's not
Taylor Lewan's podcast that the Eagles rushed back Carson Wentz from the ACL injury and he wasn't 100% like
in that 2018 season?
mentally ready. Yeah. Mentally ready to play yet, and I think that played a role into his his downward play.
That's interesting. I also think probably something that stands out to me about Wentz, and it's why you heard me talk about Hooker transferring up, Levis transferring up. Again, you'd like to see some adversity for these guys in college.
Mm-hmm.
Wentz probably had little of that. I mean, it's North Dakota State. So when you're hit with the first dose of welcome to the NFL life, whether it's your play or the injury, that can be really hard to overcome from. And, I think we all can say that Fargo is not Philadelphia. So, that probably plays into it as well.
After 6 years, Colts general manager Chris Ballard record is 7 games under 500. He said he'd look at everything to try to improve. Have you seen any evidence that he's changed anything in his approach? And this is from JJ.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I haven't seen much. Now, I wasn't expecting a full rebuild. I mean, hell, the guy was coming back. It's not like he's going to tear down everything that he's built. You see rebuilds in other places like he did here when he took over for Ryan Grigson. But no, Eddie, to be honest with you, I don't think any of going for a kicker, I guess, is a little bit different. I mean, the Ebukam deal, that's not like that shocking to me. Isaiah McKenzie, nothing on the O-line. I mean, I guess that's a little surprising considering.
Yeah, he was very openly
he's
about
wired.
Yeah, that and how he said, I want to create competition. I got to do better at that.
And there's still a couple veteran O-linemen out there, but I would say going off a month of evidence, because again, that's all we have. We'll see how the draft goes, and we'll see if there's anything else. I know it's not a typical time for blockbuster moves to happen, but we'll see how the rest of the offseason unfolds. But as of right now, it's pretty same old for me.
Was the Rodney McLeod signing last year prior to or after the draft?
Ooh, it's a good question. Look that up. Gosh, all the safety signings run together for me. I'm like, well, Mike Mitchell was in season. Mike Adams was in June. For some reason, I'm going to say it was prior. But I could be wrong.
April 14th.
Okay, so just prior?
Yeah.
You know, when you think about the Nick Cross thing, it was one of those where, hey, he's dropping. He's too good to pass up. So,
Yeah.
you know, they obviously felt good about their safety depth chart and then made that move.
The reason why I was asking because I was trying to think of the signings that Chris Ballard has made post NFL draft, because it seems like after that second week and even into that third week, really, it kind of really dies down across the entire NFL. And you see guys like Justin Houston, for example, from a few years ago, they hold out until the draft happens to see if their value.
After the draft?
What'd you say?
He was after the draft?
Well, that was after his stint in Indy.
Got it. Going to Baltimore.
After
Eric Fisher?
Yeah.
Would have fallen into that group?
Yeah, Eric Fisher, another one. See, I knew I was forgetting somebody, but it seems like there's always a signing or two from them, and they end up being a valuable piece of what either offensive or defensive for Chris Ballard.
Yeah, so I guess that's where I'm a little bit pausing right now, but so far, no.
Casey's Twitter question is next. The Colts take a quarterback this draft, and he has a typical rookie season full of struggles, but he shows some potential. If they end up with a top 2 pick next year, do they take Drake May, Caleb Williams, or Marvin Harrison Jr.? Oh, boy.
Boy, it's a great question.
Can I say what Ballard would do?
Sure.
Trade back. You know someone's going to give the kitchen sink and the fridge and the dishwasher just to get one of those 2 quarterbacks of Williams or May if they're still there.
Casey, I'm going to cop out a little bit. You know, I need to see how it plays out. I mean, you imagine Peyton Manning's rookie year in 2022, 3-13, leads the league in interceptions. That's a rookie record for interceptions. It still stands today. You know, you imagine the buzz and bailing on him with the top 5 pick the next year. So so you got to see how it plays out. And it is 1 year. I think it would depend on who the quarterback is, obviously how much that quarterback played as a rookie. I'd probably be willing to be patient and draft Harrison. But again, I would need to see it play out. And Caleb Williams is interesting. Again, he's such an escape artist. You know, how much of that is going to definitely translate to the next level?
He's so creative, too.
And you talk about eyes down the field. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've got nightmares about him against Notre Dame.
Is this from Jimmy Cook?
I don't think this is our Jimmy Cook. No. But nonetheless, we love all Jay Cooks.
I know. Jay Cook, you are up next. Your question made the pod this week. Kevin, for senior NFL staffs, is there no non-compete clauses in contracts? Did Frank go over a sing like a bird? Or is it more subtle? Thanks for all you do. I patiently wait all week for my #1 podcast.
Oh, thank you, Jay Cook. I appreciate that. I'm sorry we're coming a little bit later than we usually do. This will probably be, well, the draft will throw some things off, but this will probably be where we have the pod next Wednesday, just after Colts media availability on these off-season program days. I mean, I'm sure there's some, you know, I assume by non-competing means more of an NDA clause with that. I would think but I mean, hell, it's just say stuff behind a closed door and you're good. You know, I think one thing, Eddie, draft related, Colts intel related. Obviously, Frank's intel would be based on what? His discussions with Chris Ballard.
Yeah.
I'll be fully transparent with everybody right now, sitting here on April 12th. I don't have some strong conviction on what the Colts are going to do.
Me either.
You know, and I frankly don't have a hugely strong conviction on what I would do. And I know that's not great podcast theater. I know it's not great radio theater. Eddie, I don't know how much our listeners listen to the morning show, but obviously when the Pacers got around to the NBA draft, I was literally jumping up and down on tables day in and day out for Benedict Mathurin. Mm-hmm. Like, I wanted him like no other. I don't have that same feeling towards these quarterbacks. And again, I don't know where the Colts are leaning.
Do you have that feeling with any player in the top 5?
Yeah, I would probably stand up big time for Bryce Young or CJ Stroud in that order. maybe not to the full-on Matherin level where, I was ready to take my shirt off, but...
I was about to ask you where we at to take the shirt off level. Or
Is that the meter?
Yeah, I guess so. Well, I guess we have to extend that now because now you've thrown out the idea. What was it for Tiger?
Well, Tiger, I would have got a Tiger Speedo. Would have
There
worn
it
that
is.
on air.
There we go.
Thankfully for all involved, that purchase was not made, clearly.
I'm sure Maddie is extremely thankful.
Yes, very. I bring up all of this to say, whenever you hear people talk about the Colts draft interest, how much of that is just based off conversations we've heard months ago? How much of that is based off of Jim Irsay comments? How much of that is based off of Chris Ballard comments?
Yeah.
Stuff you might have gathered in the fall. What we're not factoring in, the newest guy in the building. Mm-hmm. Shane Steichen's been on the job for 2 months. And Shane Steichen, that dude just looks like a steel trap. I mean, he's not going to say anything. And I think he does and should have a big part in this decision process.
It's like a duck on the water.
So, yeah, that's a good way to describe it. So, again, I bring that up to say, when you hear about all this, hey, Colts this, Colts that, I'm like, are we not factoring in Shane? Because in my opinion, he might have 50% of the say. And he should. And that's the one kind of outlier in all these predictions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If it's me, I got to let my head coach have a word. He's got to have a say.
Shane likes Levis. Ballard likes Richardson. Ty goes to Irsay.
Oh. Oof.
You were cringing there.
I don't know where that would fall.
Let's wrap there, Eddie, okay?
Okay.
We'll get to the other questions on future pods. Again, we'll come back next Wednesday. I know you had a great idea of kind of getting into some non-quarterback related needs, if I'm onto something there. I think it's also good to kind of get into some scenarios.
Yep.
What do you do when you play out these scenarios, A, B, C? How do you weigh those scenarios? I know it's a fun game that we can play coming up here with the draft 2 weeks away. Everybody enjoy this weather if you're here in the local Indy area. It'll be glorious for a couple of more days.
It's going to snow again. Is that what I saw?
Oh, stop that. You don't mean that.
I don't.
No. He's Eddie Garrison. I'm Kevin Bowen. Everybody have a great rest of the week. Thanks for listening to Kevin's Corner.